Hello and welcome to Chestermere Historical Sites. This program is presented to you by the Chestermere Historical Foundation. The researchers for this program were Eileen Mcelroy, Jen Peddlesden, and Kay Clarke. The program was put together as part of preparation for a project which will be done in concert with the Western Irrigation District. The Western Irrigation District has given Chestermere Historical Foundation monies to work alongside them and the City of Calgary to provide signage in Chestermere on historical sites. So using that research, we have prepared this program to educate about those sites and also just to create a bank of good information on the sites that we believe would probably be those that should deserve signage. So we will now do our land acknowledgement. Chestermere Historical Foundation acknowledges and appreciates being on the traditional land and home of the people of Treaty 7. That would be the first 5 nations, the Siksika, Blackfoot, the Kainai, the Blood, the Piikani, the Pagan, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Sarsi. And we are also on the home of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So for our first section of this presentation, I will turn it over to Eileen to talk about the Blackfoot Trail.
So the earliest known historical site within Chestermere city limits is a portion of the Blackfoot Trail, which was an historical trail that ran from Blackfoot Crossing south of Cluny to Calgary. And it was established by the First Nations people prior to European arrival and was subsequently used by missionaries, the Northwest Mounted Police, and settlers. The route was formalized by the Dominion Land Survey in 1888. And for many years, this was the only road to town for those living east of Calgary. A fragment of the trail is still faintly visible on private property within Chestermere city limits. This satellite photo shows a portion of, the red line shows a portion of the Blackfoot Trail that runs through Chestermere city limits. As you can see, it doesn't follow the grid pattern that was surveyed by the Dominion Land Survey around the townships and sections. And that's because it followed the traditional diagonal route from Blackfoot Crossing to Calgary. The second oldest historical sites in Chestermere relate to the Canadian Pacific Railway Irrigation Project, which was the largest irrigation project ever undertaken in Canada. Construction on it began in 1904, and a low-lying marshy site that was known locally as Kinnabura Slough was utilized for Reservoir Number 1, now known as Chestermere Lake. Water was first turned into the main canal and reservoir in May 1906. There's a series here of 3 photographs which we believe were taken shortly after construction of the reservoir at Chestermere Lake and the main canal coming from Calgary. So potentially in 1906, 7, 8, something like that. This first photo is titled Big Dam Looking Toward Headgate. It looks towards the east-southeast from the berm along the south end of Chestermere, the dam that holds the water in. This second photograph is titled Looking 3 Miles Across Main Canal and Reservoir. It was taken looking towards the northeast from the south bank of the main canal, which is at the southwest corner of the lake where it enters the reservoir. And this third photo is the headgates and Reservoir Number 1. It was taken looking west-northwest from the south bank of the A Canal, which is the outlet at the south end of Chestermere Lake that runs down towards Langdon. And this is a view of what it currently looks like. Of course, the structure has been rebuilt a number of times. since then, so the structure does not look the same, but it is at the same location. And a portion of Sandpiper Lane runs over this structure, but it has recently been closed to traffic other than local and the Western Irrigation District traffic. So the first CPR irrigation headquarters was probably built sometime prior to 1910. We don't know exactly when it was built. These headquarters served as a place for the local ditch rider to live and keep his horses and store feed. And the first headquarters is indicated in the 1948 aerial photo on the left by the red square. And for those that know where Camp Chestermere is, it's also marked on this map. On the right is a satellite photo from Google Maps, and number 8 is where the irrigation headquarters buildings would have been, and now is built over by residential homes. The location would have been between present-day East Lakeview Road and Kinneborough Way. And just south of the number 8, you can see East Lake School. And again, Camp Chestermere is number 7 on that map, on that photograph. We're uncertain when the house was constructed, but certainly it was there by 1910. And the first known Chestermere ditch rider to live in it was Joseph Bannerman, who lived there until the spring of 1912. The next occupant was Fred Woods. He and his family actually coexisted in the house for about a month with the Bannerman family before the Bannermans moved. Fred eventually purchased the headquarters property from the CPR in 1918, and he farmed in the community until his death in 1943. The house, the picture of Fred Woods and his wife and 2 daughters, we believe in the background is the original CPR ditch rider house on that first location. The house was vandalized. It was rented first for some period of time. Then it was vacant and it was vandalized, and it eventually burned to the ground. As a note of interest, the stories of Joseph Bannerman and Fred Woods are posted on the Chestermere Historical Foundation website, both very interesting men. Mr. Bannerman had been a Calgary alderman and a member of the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly prior to working for CPR. Fred Woods came from England, and later his wife came as well. And he has an interesting story, and he's the only ditch rider who permanently remained in the community.
So I will go from there with a little story about the first store. So if you know where Founders Park is, we will be talking approximately about that area where the store was located. So Orrin and Vita Webster arrived at Chestermere in 1912 and set up the first store in the front of their house. So there's a picture of their little house and the store. And originally, the store had a banner that went across just underneath where it says Chestermere Lake Store, because it was originally called the Lakeview Inn. And we believe that those are members of the Webster family gathered around on this slightly later picture. And the Websters then sold the store to George and Annie Hoffner about 1926. And we will hear a bit more about the Hoffners, as they were quite active store owners in promoting sailing, rowing, and other boat activities in Chestermere. But the Websters then moved to Calgary after 1926, but they will be back. And Fred and Evelyn Shaver then purchased the store from the Hoffners in about 1934. And on that same property, we have probably the oldest building in Chestermere. It was built by the Websters just behind their house, and it was completed in 1913. And it is still standing today. This picture from 2004 does not show all the trees that have now been planted around, but you can see in the back the very first house that is located in the Cove development, which is along the east shore of the lake just beyond the causeway and the bridge. And as I said, this is located very near Founders Point. If you go there to see the cairn that recognizes Chestermere City Town's founders, you will be able to see the little barn. So the next slide, please, Eileen. So another building that we no longer have, but was constructed around that time, is the Canadian Northern Railway Station. This time in Alberta's history was kind of a boom time. The CPR had come in 1883. Natural gas had been discovered around Medicine Hat by the CPR. And the Canadian Northern Railway, which had been built along below the south end of Chestermere Lake and is still there, believed that Chestermere would be a holiday destination for people. After all, there aren't many lakes that would be as nice as this in Alberta and near large population areas. So the Canadian Northern Railway built 3 holiday type stations in Alberta. First, they built the one here in Chestermere in 1913, and then they built 2 others, and we'll talk about those in a minute. There was no siding on this at this station or anywhere to run around the station with another train. It disappeared as a stop on October 2nd, 1921, and then sadly, from disuse and abandonment, burnt down in 1930, possibly due to transients who were squatting in the disused building. Now, not long ago, my husband and I actually walked down there to see where this train station was. And although it doesn't mean much to you to say it's 124 miles west of Hannah, it's about 800 meters east of the big iron bridge. So what did the train station look like? Well, first of all, here are the plans, which were redrawn by Les Cosma for a report to Alberta Historic Sites in 1975. And we were lucky to be able to contact this gentleman who had written a book called Canadian National's Western Stations back in 2004 when we were putting together Chestermere Home for All Seasons. And he provided us with these plans. And you can see that upstairs there were 2 bedrooms. Ostensibly, they could be rented out for holiday people or people staying over to catch the train. And the other stations that were built in this style were Chestermere in 1913, then Jasper in 1915, and then Alberta Beach in 1917. And the train station in Alberta Beach is still there. It has been refurbished. So if you wanted to see what Chestermere Station would have looked like, you can visit the museum at Alberta Beach. So next slide, Eileen. So here is a picture from the Mackenzie family. That would be Kay Clarke's mother's family, who farmed just southeast of where the station is during the construction. And you can see the tracks running along in front of the building. So from our research, we know that this picture is looking south and taken from the north side of the building when it was under construction. Next slide. So this is the completed station, another photograph which has come from Kay Clarke and her family archive. And standing on the station is Kay's grandmother, Agnes Mackenzie. And Agnes Mackenzie and Kay's grandmother, Kate Mackenzie, and Kay's mother, Agnes Mackenzie, the little toddler standing on the front of the station there. So next photo. And in 2016, one of our local artists, Ellen Lorne, painted this photograph. And this photograph now hangs in Chestermere's dental station, owned by Jed Snaddick. Next slide. And as is when you go to do some research, sometimes you dig up some new things. And when I went to contact Les Cosma again, just to check with him about some details, he said, oh, I have another picture to send you. So he made this photo available to us. It's from the BC Historical Photograph Collection of Cyril Littlebury, and it shows the closed station, because as we said, no trains ran after 21, and 2 gentlemen standing on the station. but it's looking in pretty good condition there. And that's what it would have looked like just before, not long before it sadly burnt down. So I'm going to turn it back to Eileen now, who's going to talk about the second CPR irrigation headquarters.
So after Mr. Fred Woods purchased the first CPR irrigation headquarters from the CPR, they moved their headquarters location further south down near the canal and built another dwelling and barn for subsequent ditch riders. So on the left, we have a 1948 aerial photograph. The red square shows the location of the irrigation headquarters, the second irrigation headquarters, and the second set of buildings. And the Camp Chestermere is just above it slightly and to the left. And on the right, we have a satellite photo from Google Maps, number 7 being Camp Chestermere and number 6 being the current location where houses are now being built in South Kinneborough, where the ditch rider house and barn were. So this photograph is from 1918, November 1918, just at the completion of this second ditch rider house on the second property. And the first occupant of it was a man named Ted Staves and his family. Ted Stave was English born. He had served in World War I and was wounded and awarded the military medal for bravery in the field. His story is posted on the Chestermere Historical Foundation website as well. He served as the Chestermere ditch rider from 1919 to 1933, when he died tragically in an accidental shooting. This house was occupied by 3 more men and their families who worked for CPR, and at least one who worked for the Western Irrigation District after they took over the irrigation system from CPR. This house ended its life being used as an outbuilding for the new bungalow, which was the third ditch rider house built on this second property about 1975. This photograph's from 1926. The various CPR headquarters were meant to be show places to show what could be achieved with irrigation. So many trees and shrubs were planted at the properties and maintained by the ditch riders. And as we can see, the difference from the 1918 photograph, that the trees have been built around the property here. So the second ditch rider residence was unoccupied for some time. We haven't yet obtained details from the Western Irrigation District to find out when that happened, but they did subsequently build about 1975 a white bungalow prefab and erected it on the site that the second house had been on. The first person to occupy it was Dale Holwagner and his family. He moved in there about 1975 when it was brand new. And the second and last person to live in this house as ditch rider was Dwight Giddle from about 1978 to 2009. As I said, we're still waiting for details from the Western Irrigation District to be sure of the timeline on who lived where, when, and for how long. The next oldest property is Chestermere Hall and Grounds. That property was purchased from the CPR in 1921 by a group of local farmers who wanted to make recreation grounds, not just for the Chestermere area, but for farmers around a wide area to be able to come to the lake and have picnics and boating. And they planted thousands of trees over a number of years. The grounds were gradually developed with a ball diamond, half-mile racetrack, and rodeo facilities. The first thing that to be put there was an open-air dance floor, and it was constructed about 1922 with lumber removed from a building in Victoria Square, which had originally been a tractor factory and then was a munitions factory during the First World War. The permanent bungalow-style hall on the property was completed by 1926. And this site, the grounds and hall, functioned as the heart of the community, and it hosted numerous picnics and sports days, meetings, dances, and other social events. An annual stampede was held on the grounds from 1924 to 1937, with attendance peaking at about 4,000 people in 1929. This aerial photo from 1948 on the left, the red rectangle shows the location of the hall building, and the racetrack can be seen, or a shadow of it can still be seen, the oval here, even in 1948, and hadn't been used probably for 10 years or more. On the right is a picture from the first Chestermere history book, Saddles, Sleighs, and Sad Irons, and it depicts people on the open air dance floor. No covering over it, just a railing around the edge of the dance floor. This photograph from 1930, although the quality is not particularly good, shows the hall taken from the lake, it appears. Over to the right-hand side here, there's a boathouse, and this is a boat that was used to take excursions on the lake. This is what the hall looked like in the 1970s when it was nearing the end of its life. It closed in 1978, and further information on the history of the hall and grounds and the community associations that operated it can also be found on the Chestermere Historical Foundation website. There's at least 2 presentations dealing with the hall and events that happened there. This photograph shows the old hall on the left-hand side under demolition, and the new recreation center that replaced it nearing completion circa 1983. The photos from the second Chestermere history book, or maybe the third, Chestermere, A Home for All Seasons, published in 2005.
So I will carry on with the story of the Calgary Yacht Club. We were asked when we presented this last week why it was called the Calgary Yacht Club. And I believe it would be because most of the people who were coming out to the lake were people who lived in Calgary. At that time, there were farming communities around, but anyone who probably came out to do sailing was someone from Calgary. So we believe that's why it is called the Calgary Yacht Club, not the Chestermere Yacht Club. But back in 1923, the first sailboat that came on the lake was owned by Morris Schieback, and it made its appearance on the water. And in 1924, a man from Calgary, Roy Lee, purchased a 15-foot craft called the Native Daughter, and interested his friend, Sergeant Mike O'Sullivan of Calgary, who was in the police force there, interested him in the sport. In those days, everyone had a name for their sailboat, not maybe as common right now, but Morris's boat was called the Miss Calgary. Roy's, as we see, was called the Native Daughter, and Sergeant O'Sullivan's was called the Gleaner because he had been a sailor in his past life when he was living in Ireland as a young man. So, but by the time the 30s roll around, they have a clubhouse and sailing and rowing competitions. And we see in some newspaper articles, even before that, from the Calgary Daily Herald, a bit about those competitions, which you can see on our website under the Calgary Yacht Club. They built a little clubhouse, and it was located on the east shore near where Founders Point is now. And on the previous aerial photo that Eileen showed, where she showed the community center, you can see in the upper right corner what looks to be a little wishbone sort of shape. And that shows where the present day road was built further south than the existing road at that time. What happened was the yacht club was caught sort of in the top of that little wishbone area, so it was difficult for them to sail on the main part of the lake. So this all happened about 1937. They moved and built a new clubhouse just south of what is now the landing. It was designed and built by the first Commodore, A.B. Himmelman, a Nova Scotia man who'd moved to Calgary, a contractor and a boat builder. But as it got busier at the north end of the lake, by the time the 50s were rolling around, it was difficult for them to do much sailing from that end of the lake down to the other parts of the lake. So they moved to about the middle of the east side. They leased 5 lots from the WID, who was now controlling the leases of the lots along the lake. And in 1951, moved the clubhouse down to the location at 635 East Chestermere Drive. And in 2010, sadly, that old clubhouse was torn down and replaced with a new clubhouse. So let's look at some pictures of those 3 clubhouses. So this is the first one that was built on the east side, would be now north of where the Chestermere Boulevard is. And you can see it says Calgary Yacht Club. And probably amongst these gentlemen, we would be able to find A.B. Himmelman, the first Commodore, Roy Lee, his brother Pappy Lee, or A.W. Lee, and probably Sergeant O'Sullivan. And down on the ground, you can see there are 3 trophies. We believe that the one in the middle is the Hoffner Trophy for dinghy sailing. This was the family who owned the little store and very much were into promotion of sailing, rowing, and motorboat sports. So next slide, Eileen. So this was the new clubhouse that they built. And if you look to the left, you can see a small white building. That would be the store. And further left of that, another house. And we believe that would be the home of the Woimas, who were also store owners. And Eileen will tell you more about them later. So just to orient yourself. On the near left of the little clubhouse that has its iconic fascia there, we see a shed. That shed actually came along with the clubhouse when it moved down the lake about halfway to 635 East Chestermere Drive. Next slide. So this is another picture of that same area. You can see the edge of the clubhouse on the left of the photo. On the dock is Fred Pache. He was a very active sailor and remained active in Chestermere for many, many years. He actually founded the Cabin Owners Association in Chestermere. And he is there with his boat, the Lorraine. Now, at this time, this was prior to the WID having charge of the lots, the CPR would not allow you to have a cabin on the lake. So Fred Pache and others would build boathouses, which in the summertime, when the boat wasn't being stored there in the winter, they would open the doors, take the boat out, and in would go some chairs and tables and beds, and voila, they would have a cabin. So they got around it that way. And the Roberts cabin is the other cabin just to the left of the Pache's cabin. So next slide. So here we have the little yacht club, the second one, now moved to 635 East Chestermere Drive. They've also added more room on the back of the clubhouse as well. And you can see from the types of boats that are there that there are motorboats, there are sailboats, and this was a regatta in the 1960s. So next slide. And as I said, the poor old cabin was torn down in 2010 and a new clubhouse was built, and that's what the clubhouse looks like today. It's on the same, exactly the same footprint as the old clubhouse. So now I'll turn it over to Eileen, who will talk to you about the subsequent stores.
So as was mentioned earlier, Webster store was on the north side of present day Chestermere Boulevard, but the repositioning of the Causeway Road across the lake, the neck of the lake, cut that store off. And so eventually a second store was built. Now the Hoffners did operate from the first store location, and they had a boat rental place on the south side of Chestermere Boulevard. But after that bypass was done over the lake in the mid-30s, Shavers, who had purchased from Hoffners, built a second store at the boat rental location. So on the south side of Chestermere Boulevard, where Chestermere Landing now stands. Fred Shaver, well, Hoffners, as was mentioned by Jen, were very into sailing and the promotion of sailing, and they sponsored at least 3 different cups, trophies that we know of, for dinghy sailing, motorboat sailing, and rowboat race sailing. And Shavers purchased the store. Fred Shaver was a twice wounded veteran of World War I, and he married his wife in England. She was an English woman. During the time the Shavers owned the store, the phone book listing advertised Chestermere Lake Store and Tea Room. No doubt that the latter tea room was influenced by the English-born Evelyn. Here's a photograph of from 1955, looking at the store from what would roughly be right on Chestermere Boulevard now, looking towards the store. And as you can see, gas pumps have been installed. This property passed to a man named William Tremaine in 1945, and he rented the store to Walter Frostlev. Walter Frostlev at one point had a bear chained near the store, and it attracted some controversy in the Calgary Herald at the time in the 50s. And then Ted and Dolly Woima bought the property in 1952. While they owned it in 1962, a serious fire destroyed 2 boathouses, 6 stalls, and 10 boats. The Woimas operated the store until 1966, when it was sold to John Bishop. And the final owner of the store was Tony Horlacher, who eventually built the Chestermere Inn, now called Chestermere Landing, in the late 1970s. After the new building was completed, the old store was burned down. Here's another view from 1955 from the side of the store with the gas pumps. And I believe we learned that this house right here was a cabin called Moonlight Bay. And this was, next to it was the house where the Woimas were living when they owned the store.
Good. Thank you, Eileen. I believe Mr. Frostlev kept the bear in a pit so that people could look over the edge and see the bear. So I'm not sure how tame it was, but that came from Margaret Farch, who knew the family well. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the Sea Cadets Camp. And in 1938, the Calgary Sea Cadets, and their cadet troop was called Undaunted, held their first summer camp on the southeast shore of the lake, now Camp Chestermere. What's interesting about this area is it was an area that had a lot of trees planted. And in the early days, the school children from the little country school would come down there and have their picnics in the summertime because there was some shade and it was on the water. So that area then became the Sea Cadet Camp. The CPR had donated the use of the property, and the camp was supported by the Parents Association of the Calgary Sea Cadets, and it was overseen by 2 Royal Navy officers named Mitchell and Browley. So they did have the camp there in 38, but there was an official opening in 1941 after the permanent cabins were completed, and the Calgary Herald says that it was called the Chestermere Lake Patrick Burns Camp, but we're not sure exactly where that part of the name came from, but I'm sure we'll be able to find out. Possibly it was supported by Patrick Burns. So during World War II, that same camp was used as a training center under the sponsorship of the Canadian Navy League, Southern Alberta District. And the last cadet camp held there was held in 1948. And following that, a group of independent churches, the Gospel Missionary Association, began renting the property for summer camps and eventually purchased it in 1955. And that area is still being used as a camp year-round now with various activities, including summer camps for kids. So next slide. So let's look at some of the buildings. So the little camp cabin on the left, a little light brown cabin, that is one of the original cabins that was built and would have been there in that opening in 1941. And I will show you where it is on the next map. And on the right is the ice house that would have been built around the same time to store ice for use when they had the kids there in the summertime. And that is still in existence. And next slide. So there's an overview of the camp, an aerial photo. You can see the arrow on the left showing one of the little cabins, and that is the cabin that still exists and has been maintained by Camp Chestermere. And underneath the little star, I believe that's where the ice house would have been. But you can see that there were quite a few trees there for back in the 30s, when the rest of the area around the lake was pretty bare. So next slide. So when we were doing this program, not only did we get a new photograph of the Chestermere station, but I contacted the military museums and the Naval Museum section of the military museums in Calgary, and was really excited. We received 4 photographs, a confirmation that our history was pretty correct, and also 4 photographs that we had never seen before from those days of the camp. So this is called Cutter Crew at Chestermere Lake. The cutter is an open rowed boat, and it was carried on 18th century ships, but is still in use in UK for racing. So likely that's what they were doing here, was using it for racing. So next slide. And as we all know, if you've ever lived near Chestermere Lake, those prairie storms can blow up pretty quickly and be pretty fierce. So here are the boys the next morning after the storm, cleaning out the water from inside their sailboat. And it looks like it was quite a storm and quite a mess that they were left with. But this was another of the photographs from the Naval Museum that we received. And I am going to now tell you about the Baldwin property and house. So the Baldwin property is on the corner of East Chestermere Drive and Merganser. And Len and Lucille, who was a Webster, Len and Lucille Baldwin, spent their summers in their partly finished house after their marriage in 33, and didn't move out there until 1940, where became their permanent home. It is, we believe, the oldest house in Chestermere on its original site. And this is a photograph from the early days of that little house. And let's have the next slide, Eileen. And this is a picture of more recent photograph from a different angle of the same little house, which is still there, as I said. So next slide. So on this property as well is another historic building, and that would be this shed that we can see in the photograph, because Len Baldwin was the bus driver in the community from 1943 until 1975. He had a very long career, and many school children knew Len very well, as did their families. But one of the schools that he served closed in 1955. That was Rockland School. That's located approximately where East Hills is now, up what would have been 68th Street. And it was there for quite a number of years. You could see the old building, but it's long gone now. And when the school closed in 55, the barn was not going to be used anymore. It had been there to house the children's horses when they came to the school. So as Len needed a bus barn, he hauled it down to his property, and he built a section on the right-hand side to match it, so that he would have a completely large enough barn to put modern-day school bus in. So that building is still on the property there, and a remnant from the school days of Rockland School. And next slide, Eileen. So that concludes our program. We appreciate you watching it, and we would love to hear from you. There is a contact link on our website. You can see many more details about quite a few of those stories on the website. And you can also follow us on social media, on Facebook or on Twitter. And we also invite you to purchase the most recent history book. There are still some left, called Chestermere: Home for All Seasons. They are $20, and you can find out more about that by just sending us a message on Contact Us, and we can arrange to get the history book to you. So watch for future programs that we will be presenting live, probably with Zoom and possibly even in person in the next months. And if not, you can always check out the programs that we have done on our website under programs. So I would like to thank Eileen and Kay, and welcome you to contact us and get to know more about Chestermere. It's always good to know where you live, and find out what the history has been of where you are now settled. Thank you.